This episode contains discussions of abduction and murder of a child, as well as sexual abuse and violence. Please take care of yourself while listening and consider skipping this episode if these topics are difficult for you. Listener discretion is strongly advised. On Australia's Sunshine Coast, December is supposed to feel light. School is out for the year, Christmas decorations line the streets, and families are getting ready for long summer days spent at the beach or shopping for last-minute gifts. And Palm Woods is a place where kids, they walk to the bus stop on their own, neighbors wave as they drive past, and it's a place where parents believe that their children are safe. But on Sunday, December 7th of 2003, that sense of safety abruptly disappeared.
In the middle of an ordinary Sunday afternoon, a 13-year-old boy did everything right. He followed a routine he's done many times before, but somewhere along that routine, that boy vanished.
And what followed would become one of the largest and longest investigations in Queensland history. It was 8 years of false leads, missed opportunities, and a family who refused to stop asking questions. This is the story of Daniel Morcombe. I'm Ashley.
And I'm Ricky.
And this is Crime Salad. Daniel Morcombe was born on December 19th of 1989 in Melbourne, Australia. He was just a few years old when his family relocated north to Queensland's Sunshine Coast, settling into a quieter, more rural way of life. And by 2003, the Morcombe family was living on a small property in Palm Woods, a place where the kids grew up playing outdoors surrounded by animals. And Daniel lived there with his parents and his two brothers, Dean and Bradley. This was a family, by all accounts, that was doing well. And just 2 months before Daniel disappeared, his parents had become regional franchisors for Jim's Trees, a business focused on tree trimming and removal. Life was busy, but stable. Daniel attended Siena Catholic College at Sippy Downs alongside his brothers and had just completed year 9 in 2003. He was about 155 centimeters tall with dark brown collar-length hair, and teachers and family described him as quiet, well-behaved, and not troublesome. He was a normal 13-year-old growing up in a secure family environment. He loved motocross, animals, and helped care for his pets, including a pony. And like many kids in rural communities, Daniel and his brothers worked part-time picking passion fruit for neighbors.
Daniel was responsible, trusted, and old enough to help out, earn a little money, and move through his community independently. He wasn't reckless or a runaway. He was just a kid living a pretty normal life.
Right, and the morning Daniel disappeared, it began just like so many others. The Paxton family lived just a short distance away, and Daniel and his brothers were familiar faces on the property. Well, that morning, the boys were there early picking passion fruit, a part-time job that they had done many times before, and the arrangement that day was simple. Daniel's parents, they organized a Christmas gathering for their franchises, and the event was set to begin at around 11 a.m. and wrap up by mid-afternoon. The plan was for the boys to finish picking fruit early enough to go with their parents. The work started at around 6:30 that morning, and at that time of year, collecting passion fruit typically took about 2 hours. Daniel's father later said he expected the boys would be finished at around 8:30 that morning, giving them plenty of time to get organized before leaving for the Christmas party.
Apparently, Judith Paxton didn't drive Daniel and his brother back to the Morcombe property until 9:45. While their older brother, he had already returned home earlier. And apparently some scattered showers had delayed them and they didn't begin to work until 7:30. So everything was pushed back an hour. Before Daniel left, he was paid for his work and he received $90. With the timing thrown off, Daniel's parents asked the boys whether they still wanted to go to the Christmas party with the time they had left. And the boys told him that they were happy to just stay home.
And so later that afternoon, sometime after 1 p.m., Daniel left the family's property on his own. He was going to walk to Nambour Connection Road and catch a bus to Sunshine Plaza, which was the main shopping center in the area. According to his father, this wasn't new. Daniel had taken that same bus trip at least 15 times before. And when Daniel left home that afternoon, he was wearing navy blue long shorts, a red Billabong t-shirt, and a pair of Globe shoes. He carried a wallet with around $100 in cash, a Commonwealth Bank key card, his student ID, a video store card, and a phone card. Daniel walked roughly 1.3 kilometers from his home to Nambour Connection Road, stopping beneath the Keel Mountain Road overpass to wait for the bus. Back in Brisbane, the Jim's Trees Christmas gathering wrapped up as planned, and Daniel's parents began the drive home, unaware that anything was wrong. They arrived back at Palm Woods at around 4 p.m., and by then, Daniel should have been on his way home. Sunbus services, they ran on an hourly schedule on Sundays, and at approximately 4:30, Daniel's mother drove to the bus stop to collect Daniel, expecting him to be on the bus arriving from Sunshine Plaza. But Daniel wasn't there.
At first, the fact didn't immediately scream danger. Maybe he missed the bus. Maybe he stayed longer than he had planned to. There had to be some kind of reasonable explanation. But when more time passed, the concern grew.
And when Daniel still hadn't returned home, Daniel's parents did what any parents would do. They went out looking for him. They drove straight to Sunshine Plaza, retracing the trip Daniel was supposed to have taken that afternoon. There, they were able to confirm that the last bus from the shopping center had departed at 5:05 p.m., and Daniel wasn't on it. At that point, if he missed the last bus, he would have called. And if he stayed longer, someone should have seen him. But no one saw him. So they kept going. After failing to find Daniel at the plaza, his parents, Bruce and Denise, followed the bus route back toward Palm Woods, hoping to spot him walking along the road. They tried calling Sunbus, desperate to confirm whether services had been running on schedule that afternoon, but no one answered. Eventually, they intercepted a bus on the road, and the driver told them that at that time of day, there was no one at the Sunbus depot who could confirm whether the buses had been running as scheduled. With nowhere else to look, Daniel's parents returned again to Sunshine Plaza, making further inquiries about the last bus service and searching the center one more time for any sign of their son. Still, nothing. Finally, as daylight faded and panic set in, they made the decision to drive to the Maroochydore police station and report Daniel missing, arriving at approximately 7:30 p.m.
At the front counter, they were met by Sergeant Robbie Munn, who began taking down details about Daniel, like his physical appearance, family relationships, and his general well-being. He asked whether Daniel had any mental health issues, and Daniel's father was clear in his response that this was something that was completely out of character for Daniel.
Daniel's father told the sergeant that Daniel's disappearance made no sense at all. On previous occasions, if Daniel was running late, he always called. There had been no argument that day or any reason for Daniel to stay away. In fact, Daniel's father explained that Daniel had gone to Sunshine Plaza to buy Christmas presents for his family. He also walked Sergeant Munn through everything they had already done, like their own searches, the conversations with Daniel's brothers, and their attempts to contact Sunbus and BusLink, which are the two bus companies in the area. They'd driven the bus routes to try and find Daniel, maybe walking alongside the road, and they searched the shopping center twice. But despite all of that, Sergeant Munn told them that Daniel would not be listed as a missing person at that stage. So Daniel's parents returned home, and they continued to try and locate their son. They began calling Daniel's school friends one by one. Every single one of them said that they had not seen or heard from Daniel at all that day. Still hoping for answers, Bruce and Denise searched their farm, and when they turned up with nothing, they grabbed a torch and went back out to the Keel Mountain Road overpass, checking the bus stop areas themselves in the dark. But there was no sign of Daniel.
Late that night, Daniel's parents received 2 phone calls from Sergeant Munn, asking if Daniel had come home. Then, just before midnight, a call came in from Senator Constable Campbell at Palm Woods Police. He told them that they should come back and make a formal missing persons report when the station opened up at 8 a.m. the next morning. Daniel's father later said that even though he didn't protest, he didn't feel right, thinking that Daniel's disappearance wasn't being taken seriously. And instead of waiting, he continued to do what he had been doing the whole day. He kept searching.
At first light on December 8th of 2003, they were back on the road and they drove again to the Keel Mountain overpass, back to Sunshine Plaza, and they walked the same exact route Daniel would have taken from home to the bus stop and back again, scanning everywhere their son might have stopped. At 8 a.m. after dropping their eldest son off at work, they went to Palm Woods Police Station. This time, they were met by Sergeant Davison, and he took a detailed, thorough account of Daniel's movements on December 7th, what he was wearing, where he was going, and why. This was the first time they felt like someone was actually truly listening. And within a short amount of time, Sergeant Davison had already confirmed that through calls to the bus company, they established that a boy matching Daniel's description had been seen at the overpass wearing the same clothes they had described. Sergeant Davison also learned something else that day, but something Daniel's parents would not be told until much later. That Daniel had been seen in the company of an older male at the bus stop. But they didn't know this yet. So when Daniel's parents left the station that morning, they finally felt confident that a real investigation was underway.
Daniel wasn't a kid who wandered off. He wasn't known to break rules or disappear without telling anyone. His parents told police that if he was running late, he always called. There were no arguments at home or distress. So it's wild that, as a minor, this is being treated as a wait-and-see situation by police.
Right, but officers later said they believed it was a misunderstanding, like he was running late with friends, and because of that assumption, they didn't think it was an emergency. And that's where hindsight is 20/20. So later, during a coronial inquest, it's called, which is a formal court investigation in Australia where a coroner examines the evidence to determine how and why someone died without assigning any guilt. So during that, police acknowledged that if Daniel had been formally listed as missing that night, additional inquiries could have been made sooner, including contacting the bus company, confirming movements, and potentially identifying witness information earlier. But by the time this happened, Daniel had already been missing overnight.
Yeah, especially with children, even a few hours, it matters so much. But anyway.
Yeah, and it's been 3 days. By the morning of December 8th, Daniel's disappearance, it had officially moved into the hands of detectives. And during those first 3 days, there was an intensive response. State emergency service volunteers were deployed to conduct ground searches across the area. Police divers were activated to search nearby waterways, working under the assumption that Daniel could have been injured or had an accident. And at the same time, investigators were tracking down every possible lead. They followed up on reported sightings of Daniel both before and after he disappeared, and investigated reports of vehicles seen near the overpass. Daniel's bank account was also checked for any activity that might indicate movement or contact. Forensic work was also underway. Police conducted examinations of the overpass itself, and buses that operated along that route were examined. They searched for anything that might explain what happened between Daniel waiting for the bus and never arriving home. Door knocks were carried out across the surrounding area, asking if anyone might have seen something. And as the investigation intensified, Queensland police began locking down every possible source of information tied to Daniel's movements that day. Closed-circuit television footage was collected from Sunshine Plaza security cameras, and officers also secured CCTV footage from service stations within a 5-kilometer radius of the bus stop, as well as from the nearby railway station. Anywhere Daniel might have passed through or where a vehicle connected to him might have been captured on a camera.
At the same time, police worked to remove uncertainty around the buses themselves. Sunbus trip timings were verified using ticketing machines, so investigators could establish exactly when the buses ran, where they stopped, and whether Daniel had boarded one unnoticed. They were trying their hardest to tighten the timeline, but as time passed, the police had to deal with a much darker possibility.
Yeah, I mean, the lead that they have where someone saw Daniel with an older male, it's got to be eating them away at this point. So investigators started interviewing known sex offenders with links to the area, particularly connected to the Christian Outreach Center located immediately behind the Keel Mountain Road overpass. Inquiries were also made with Sunshine Coast cabs, checking for any pickups or drop-offs near the bus stop or surrounding roads around the time Daniel disappeared. And police, they were trying to determine whether Daniel may have entered the vehicle voluntarily or was taken. At a higher level, state crime command specialists who dealt specifically with child sexual offenses were brought in. Their job was to review intelligence on convicted child sex offenders across the entire North Coast Police region. And from that intelligence, investigators prioritized a list of offenders for review. Officers began speaking to those offenders as well as associates, family members, and anyone who might provide context, alibis, or contradictions.
Meanwhile, another massive task was underway. Police conducted searches of 71 secondhand pawnbrokers and dealers across the region, looking for any trace of Daniel's belongings. So the net just got wider and wider.
Yes, so by the morning of December 9th, the investigation into Daniel's disappearance had escalated dramatically. Queensland police established a major incident room, known as MIR, at the police station, and the operation was called Operation Bravo Vista. And from that point forward, Daniel's case became huge. Police activate MIRs when a case is serious, complex, and potentially criminal, and when information is coming in fast and it has to be managed carefully. Detective Senior Sergeant Schmidt later explained that the MIR became the central command point for the entire investigation. Initially, 4 officers from the Homicide Investigation Unit were assigned just to manage information, like logging tips, storing data electronically, and creating job logs for follow-up.
There was even a dedicated reader whose job was quality control. They reviewed every piece of information that came in, deciding whether it needed further investigation or whether it could be closed out so nothing could slip through the cracks. According to Schmidt, the first 72 hours involved deploying the full weight of every police resource they had available. In total, about 60 police officers were actively involved, and at times, closer to 100.
So on December 14th, police, they carried out a full reenactment. A mannequin was placed at the side of the road, dressed in clothing identical to what Daniel had been wearing. The goal was to understand who might have seen him. As a result, every southbound vehicle traveling along the road that day was intercepted, and the drivers were questioned about their movements on December 7th, asking whether they recalled seeing a boy at the bus stop or anything unusual. They also brought witnesses back to the scene so they could stand where they'd been, point out where they saw Daniel, where they noticed vehicles, and where they remembered people of interest.
But apparently by this point, the investigation was unique in comparison to other investigations. Sergeant Barnes later testified about how overwhelming the flow of information became. Tips were coming in constantly, directly from the public and through Crime Stoppers. Thousands of pieces of information were coming in, a lot of them duplicate tips. So they struggled to process all the information that they were getting, but they still pressed on.
Just 2 weeks after Daniel Morcombe disappeared, police were still following hundreds of leads, knocking on doors, interviewing people connected to the area, and trying to separate meaningful clues from background noise. One of those doors belonged to Brett Peter Cowan. Detective Dennis Martin would later say that from the moment that he drove up Cowan's driveway, something didn't sit right. Cowan lived at the front of the block, and scattered throughout the yard were handmade items like windmills, decorations, and other things that Cowan made and sold at markets. But the items themselves weren't the issue, but how they looked. Martin described seeing butterflies painted on the blades of the windmills, bright, childlike designs. Martin thought it was strange that it looked like a kid's area, and Cowan didn't have young children.
Martin was meant to be verifying the information and alibis of sex offenders living in the area. And one of the files he received was that of Brett Peter Cowan. Martin already knew who Cowan was and his criminal history, including a 1993 conviction for a sexual assault of a 6-year-old child.
So investigators had received reports of a white 4-wheel drive with a black snorkel seen near the underpass where Daniel was last observed. And that description matched Cowan's vehicle. Once detectives got to his house, they got straight to the point. They began questioning him about his whereabouts on the day Daniel disappeared. And at first, Cowan's answers were vague. He admitted that he might have gone into Nambour around the time Daniel was last seen near the Nambour Connection Road. As Martin pressed for specifics, Cowan insisted that he hadn't seen any children. Then Martin asked about a white 4-wheel drive with a snorkel. And Cowan again said he'd never seen a vehicle matching that description. But Martin started applying more pressure. He told Cowan he was a pedophile, a serious one, and that Daniel was in his preferred age group. Shockingly, Cowan responded, agreeing Daniel looked like a child that would be in his preferred age group. So sick.
So he basically admitted to seeing Daniel, because just seconds before that, Cowan insisted that he hadn't seen anyone at all. I mean, how would he know what Daniel looked like if he had never seen him?
Yeah, exactly. So Martin called it out. He said, quote, "That's strange. I thought you said you didn't see anyone." So Cowan backtracked, saying that he might have pulled over and seen Daniel. Shortly after that, Cowan became angry and he shut the conversation down. After that interview, Dennis Martin believed the next steps were obvious. He said the following day, his partner briefed the major incident room on what they'd seen, heard, and what their instincts were telling them. According to Martin, that's where it stopped. The investigation didn't shift toward Cowan as a stronger suspect, but continued to process all the overwhelming amounts of information and people of interest that they had listed.
According to later inquest hearings, Assistant Commissioner Mike Condon explained that the MIR was dealing with an overwhelming number of persons of interest and at a certain point reached its capacity. And investigators had to start pushing leads out to other units.
Apparently, Cowan was interviewed again on December 22nd and on the 23rd, as well as his wife. Additionally, his vehicle was examined on December 24th. Cowan's official story was that he was driving past the bus stop on his way to buy marijuana from his drug dealer when he noticed Daniel standing there alone. He admitted that he'd stopped to offer Daniel a ride, but continued on his way when Daniel turned him down. The Assistant Commissioner, Mike Condon, he said that there were hundreds of suspects that required constant triage, so there was just too much information for them to process to make any kind of conclusions, and there wasn't enough evidence to pursue Cowan any further. So the case sat unresolved with detectives combing through mountains of information. In December of 2004, about 1,000 people attended a memorial service to mark the first anniversary of Daniel's disappearance, and a special plaque was unveiled at the site to remember him. As Daniel's parents sat without answers, the Queensland government posted a $250,000 reward for more information leading to an arrest or a conviction. By 2005, no meaningful movements had been made, besides the fact that police released 3 sketches of the man seen near Daniel when he waited for the bus.
So in February of 2005, Bruce and Denise Morcombe, Daniel's parents, founded the Daniel Morcombe Foundation, which has grown into one of the most well-known child safety organizations in Australia.
Bruce Morcombe said that their objectives in establishing the Daniel Morcombe Foundation were far-reaching. He said that people must protect their children, and people can and will make a difference by ensuring that communities are a safe place. Support for the foundation would assist in providing an effective child safety awareness program and assist other victims of crimes, especially where children are involved. Denise Morcombe said that they formed the foundation to keep Daniel's innocence alive and to honor their son, and also to help other families from ever having this nightmare happen to them, because children are our future and must be protected. Even though this foundation skyrocketed with support, it still didn't do anything to move Daniel's case forward. As detectives struggled to find solid leads with evidence, they had witness testimonies and suspicious interviews, but not anything tangible to lead them toward a culprit. In December of 2008, a record $1 million private reward was offered for new information about Daniel's disappearance. But when nothing came by 2009, Bruce and Denise appealed for new leads. Still nothing.
In April of 2010, the state coroner received an extensive investigation report, which contained thousands of pages from the police, and by October of 2010, a coronial inquest led by state coroner Michael Barnes began. So what this means is that the Queensland police submitted a formal report saying in plain terms that they suspected Daniel was deceased, and if he was, his death was likely violent and otherwise unnatural. Once the state coroner reviewed the police report, they agreed that Daniel was likely deceased, and that meant the case was officially reportable under the law. That gave the coroner legal authority to investigate what happened.
So when the inquest formally began, witnesses testified about seeing Daniel waiting for a bus near Nambour Connection Road, and some of those witnesses described one or two older males nearby, and some said that there was an interaction. But the reality of the case was painfully clear. Despite years of investigation, witness interviews, reviews, and renewed searches, no account of Daniel's movements had proven reliable enough to tell police exactly where he went or what happened to him after he was last seen. There was no single witness whose version could be treated as definitive, and no timeline was solid enough to anchor a prosecution. And so the inquest adjourned after Assistant Commissioner Mike Condon gave evidence defending the handling of the biggest police investigation in Queensland history. There was no fighting that police did everything they could. Denise and Bruce, they struggled to handle the fact that there were too many conflicting statements and almost no physical evidence to pinpoint what had happened to their innocent son when he left to buy Christmas gifts for his family. But meanwhile, something big was happening. After Daniel vanished, and after that first deeply unsettling interview with Brett Cowan, just 2 weeks later, police would speak to him again in 2005. But still, his alibi couldn't be challenged. At some point between 2005 and 2011, Cowan had changed his name to Shadow N. Una Hunter. And when he was called to give evidence for the coronial inquest, he was defiant, to say the least.
Cowan was adamant that he had nothing to do with Daniel's disappearance. But that statement wouldn't hold for long, because shortly after appearing at the inquest, Cowan told someone else a very different story. Someone who happened to be undercover police. He admitted that he had picked Daniel up from the bus stop to, in his words, have fun with him.
This was huge, and what followed was one of the largest, most sophisticated undercover police operations Queensland has ever undertaken. An entire fake gang, complete with hierarchy, money, trust, and danger, was built around this guy. Cowan was slowly drawn in through initiation rituals, escalating criminal scenarios like gun running, pimping, debt collecting, and even illegal crayfish dealing. Yeah. Undercover officers from Queensland, Western Australia, and Victoria assumed criminal identities, and they paid Cowan for his work for over a 4-month period. After this, they promised him a payoff of his life, a big job that would earn him $100,000. In reality, Cowan's anxiety was deliberately being pushed to its breaking point. Because after months of building trust with this guy, the police made him believe everything was about to fall apart. So, a fake corrupt police officer told the gang that Cowan was about to be subpoenaed again in the Daniel Morcombe inquest, and that made Cowan a liability. Now, in Cowan's mind, that meant that he could lose the $100,000 payoff, and worse, he could bring police attention onto the gang.
To decide his fate, Cowan was flown to Perth and brought before the gang's so-called boss. And what Cowan didn't know is that the hotel room was secretly wired for audio and video. Believing he had to prove his loyalty to survive, Cowan finally admitted what police had waited years to hear. He said, "Yeah, I did it."
Yes, And it was days later, Brett Cowan, he was flown back to Queensland with undercover police officers posing as the big boss's henchman. And Cowan led them to the place where he said that he dumped Daniel's body, which was on an isolated macadamia farm and sand mining site off Kings Road in the Glass House Mountains. On August 13th, 2011, Brett Peter Cowan was arrested at that bush site by Queensland detectives, surrounded by the police who had been playing the roles of criminals the whole time, literally. So after his arrest, the focus of the investigation shifted, as police, forensic teams, and volunteers began searching the sand mining site and surrounding bushland Cowan had led them to, deep in the Sunshine Coast. And the discoveries came slowly. On the fourth day of the search, investigators found a Wright Globe brand shoe, the same brand Daniel had been wearing the day he disappeared. And 3 days later, a second shoe was located.
Over the following week, 17 bone fragments, along with items of clothing identified as belonging to Daniel Morcombe, were recovered from the mud of the sand mining site and from the waters of Coochin Creek. Each discovery confirmed what Daniel's parents had already known in their hearts and had feared for nearly 8 years.
By October 12th of 2011, DNA testing confirmed what no one wanted, but everyone needed to know, which was that the remains recovered in August belonged to the poor, precious Daniel Morcombe. By the time the search had concluded, it had spanned 9 weeks. Police described it as unprecedented, saying that more than 900 people spent 13,000 hours searching brushland, refusing to stop until Daniel was found. And all that was left to do was to build the case against Brett Cowan. Meanwhile, in November of 2011, Bruce and Denise Morcombe were named 2012 Queensland Australians of the Year for their child advocacy work following their son's disappearance, something that was definitely much deserved for their continued strength and advocacy while their son's case sat in limbo for so many years. On October 25th of 2012, all preliminary matters were finalized between the Crown prosecution and the defense, setting the stage for Brett Cowan's committal hearing in the Brisbane Magistrates Court. In this case, the volume of evidence was significant, and 6 witnesses were scheduled to give evidence in closed court, while more than 40 additional witnesses were expected to testify in open court. On November 26th of 2012, Cowan's committal hearing formally began, which is similar to an indictment hearing in the U.S., where the judge decides if prosecutors have enough evidence to build a case.
On December 7th of 2012, Daniel Morcombe finally received a proper funeral service to honor his memory.
In February of 2013, Brett Cowan was committed to stand trial for Daniel Morcombe's abduction and the murder in the Brisbane Magistrates Court, and the trial was set to begin in February of 2014. So, this was a decade after Daniel disappeared. During his trial, the court was presented with a picture of a man that prosecutors described as a serial predator, someone with an extensive and deeply troubling history of sexually abusing children. And this part will be rough, so we just want to put an additional warning here. He testified that by the time he turned 18, he had already preyed on up to 30 children. He says his offending stretched back to when he was about 9 or 10 years of age. But he was first convicted of a child sex offense in 1989 when he inappropriately touched a 7-year-old boy in the public toilets of a Queensland playground. Crown prosecutor Michael Byrne told the jury that the confessions by Cowan were a powerful aspect of the evidence in the trial, so much so that they overcame any lingering questions the jury may have had about the descriptions of the male at the overpass that day.
Mr. Byrne continued by saying that Brett Cowan killed Daniel when he tried to escape Cowan's attempts to sexually assault him at an excluded property. He said Cowan applied a chokehold to Daniel's neck before he immediately and callously disposed of the body. In that context, he suggests that Cowan panicked and deliberately killed him as an act of self-preservation.
I mean, the main argument was that Cowan killed Daniel, whether he originally intended to or not. Either way, Cowan undoubtedly murdered Daniel within an hour of his abduction. Byrne explained how in 2011, Cowan became the target of an elaborate undercover police operation which was designed to do what years of traditional investigation could not. According to the Crown, Cowan made his confession, telling the big boss, Arnold, that while driving toward Namber one day, he noticed Daniel Morcombe standing at the bus stop. Cowan said he parked his car and offered Daniel a lift, and Daniel accepted. From there, Cowan drove him to a secluded area near Birwa, which was about a half-hour away, and took him into a house. Prosecutors told the jury that Cowan had planned to sexually assault Daniel and then drop him off at a shopping center. But Daniel tried to escape. Daniel was killed, and his body was dragged down an embankment with his clothes thrown into the nearby creek. Despite all of this, Cowan pleaded not guilty.
But luckily, the jury saw through any justification for what Brett Cowan did. After more than a decade of waiting, it took the jury 7.5 hours to reach a verdict. Brett Peter Cowan, who was 44 years old at the time, was found guilty of murder, indecent treatment of a child, and interfering with a corpse.
As the verdicts were read out in a packed courtroom, Cowan showed no emotion, staring straight ahead. Behind him, Daniel's parents and his brother, Bradley, burst into tears. When asked if he had anything to say in the response to the verdicts, Cowan replied with a single word, no. Then came the victim impact statements, where Daniel's father, Bruce, told the court that he was still haunted by thoughts of how his son had been held captive and what was done to him. He addressed Cowan directly by saying that 10 years ago, he made a choice that ripped their family apart and robbed Daniel of decades of life. He went on to say that he often wondered about other victims that Cowan left in his wake. He said sitting in the same room as Brett Cowan revolted him.
Amen to that. As Bruce finished speaking, the whole courtroom erupted into applause. But Brett Cowan didn't even look at him. That coward.
There was also a statement from Daniel's mother that was read aloud by Michael Byrne, where she said that she made a vow to Daniel to find out where he was and make sure that justice was done. She said that this day didn't bring closure, but the streets were at least safer. Daniel's brother Bradley spoke about the life that was taken from Daniel and from him. He told the court that he was not the person he could have been, and Daniel couldn't join him for a beer or be the best man at his wedding. With that, the jury accepted the Crown's case in full, that Cowan abducted Daniel while he was waiting for a bus on December 7th of 2003, that he killed him by choking him, and he disposed of his remains at an old sand mining site, and that he later confessed in secretly recorded conversations with undercover police, posing as criminal gang members. The prosecution asked the court to impose the harshest possible sentence, telling the court that what Brett Cowan did was everyone's worst nightmare. After the guilty verdicts were handed down, Justice Rosalind Atkinson addressed the court, acknowledging that there was nothing she could say that could assuage the pain and hurt. Outside the courthouse, Queensland police spoke publicly, saying that they were satisfied with the outcome, and they took a moment to acknowledge the scale of what it had taken to get there, which was lengthy, complex, and very protracted. So today, Brett Peter Cowan is serving a life sentence for the murder of Daniel Morcombe, and he will be eligible for parole in 2031.
With everything that he's done, the 1987 incident wasn't the only one. He was arrested again 4 years later for attacking a boy so brutally that he had a punctured lung. He was left to die in an old car. That child staggered into a service station, naked and bleeding. And he only confessed to the police after they told him they had DNA evidence.
Yeah, Brett Cowan is a deeply dangerous person. It would be horrible to see him get out on parole. Hopefully that doesn't happen. But one of the most lasting impacts of the Daniel Morcombe case, it didn't come from the conviction itself. It came years later in 2019, when the coroner's findings led to real changes in how Queensland handles serious investigations. The first recommendation required a mandatory independent review of any homicide or high-risk missing person case that remains unsolved for 12 months. Crucially, that review cannot be carried out by the same investigators already working the case. Instead, independent detectives are appointed, given full access to all evidence and job logs, and their findings are formally reported to the coroner's court. That process is now built into the police procedure.
And that directly addresses one of the biggest risks in long-running cases, which is tunnel vision. These investigations grow fast, collect thousands of tips, and important details can get lost. An independent review forces fresh eyes onto old evidence before years pass.
In this second recommendation, it focuses on the families. It called for changes to prevent long delays in returning human remains when legal disputes arise. In Daniel's case, his remains were recovered in August, but his family had to wait until October to lay him to rest. The government agreed that when a person's identity is established with a high degree of certainty, remains should return to the family as soon as possible, even while legal proceedings continue, while still protecting the right to a fair trial.
That recommendation was accepted in principle in 2019 and now sits alongside Queensland's human rights framework, balancing fairness for the accused with dignity for victims and their families.
And these reforms exist because Daniel's case, it showed that even massive investigations can stall, and early warning signs, early red flags can be missed. In October of 2025, Queensland passed Daniel's Law. It created a 3-tiered child sex offender register focused on education, prevention, and child safety. The system allows police to alert the public when high-risk offenders cannot be located. It enables residents to check for serious offenders in the area, and it gives parents a way to ask police if someone who will have unsupervised contact with their child is a reported offender. Safeguards are built in to prevent misuse and vigilantism.
The goal is protection, not punishment, giving families information when it's genuinely needed, while making sure it can't be weaponized.
Beyond the law itself, the Daniel Morcombe Foundation, it continues its work. Every year on the last Friday in October, thousands of people across Australia wear red for Day of Daniel, which is a national day of action dedicated to keeping children safe. And the red t-shirt Daniel was wearing that day has become a symbol of child safety awareness. Schools, businesses, and communities across Australia participate, sharing Daniel's message and empowering children with personal safety education. If you have any information related to crimes against children or concerns about child safety, please contact your local authorities or appropriate child protection services.
And if you or someone you know has been affected by this case or something similar, support is available.
Thank you all so much for listening to Daniel's story on Crime Salad. Please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing this episode. If you would like to become a patron, you can join us at patreon.com/crimesaladpodcast. As always, stay safe, take care of yourself, and we will see you next time.